This video talks about conditional sentences. If you have not seen the video on the anatomy of sentences with clauses, I recommend you watch that first. Might also be a good idea to watch the video on wish statements as well. So let's start with a conditional sentence. Here's an example of a conditional sentence. Most people identify a conditional sentence by this word, if. And it's true that most conditional sentences have this word, though you can make a conditional sentence with another type of conjunction, not just the word if, and I'll show some more examples of that later. But in the meantime, we're just going to work with this one because it is the most common. A conditional sentence is a complex sentence, meaning it has two clauses, a dependent and an independent clause. And the dependent clause is the one that presents the condition. You might recall from the previous video on clauses that we can reorder this information. If you want, you can put the independent clause first. It doesn't change the information, it's just the way it's presented. Now, the dependent clause in a conditional sentence is known as the condition. It's the condition clause, sometimes called the if clause as well. And the independent clause is called the result. The result is what happens when the information in the condition comes true, when it is met. When that condition is met, the result occurs. There are four types of conditional sentences in English. And here they are. They're labeled with a number. They do have different names, more complex, you might see in some grammar books, but we also use these numbers, and I think it's just easier to remember 0 through third. You can see they are used in very different ways, and they have very different structures. So we're going to examine them one at a time. Let's start with the zero conditional. Here's the example from the previous page. We use the zero conditional for facts, truths, things that are 100% true. There's no room for possibility. And that's why it's called the zero conditional, because it's not really a conditional. There's no possible result. It's definitely going to happen. Often we use these for scientific facts, like the example here. Let's break down the two clauses, the condition and the result. Notice the verb form. That's what we're going to pay attention to here. The verb form in both clauses is in the present. So in the zero conditional, this is the form it has to take, and that's how we know that we're talking about a fact, because it's present in both clauses. Here's another example, and I put the result clause first. Remember, it doesn't matter. You can have the condition first or the result first. Here's the result clause on the left and the condition on the right, and you'll notice again that both verbs are in the present. And a final example, this one is a question. Conditional sentences don't have to be statements, they can be questions, but again, it's the zero conditional. You need to put both verbs in the present. So let's look at the first conditional. The first conditional is a little bit different from the zero conditional in that the conditions that I present are real or possible, and the results are definite, but there's a possibility. That's the key here. It's not necessarily going to happen like the facts presented in the zero conditional. Look at the condition. The condition is in the present, just like the zero conditional. So we're going to use a present tense in the condition, but the result clause appears in the future. And this is how we know that we're talking about something that is not necessarily going to occur. It's just what we believe will happen if this condition is met. Now when I say it's in the future, you're not limited to the word will. In the first example, I might use the word may to represent a possible future. You can use might as well, will, may, or might. Or have a look at this second example. I can also use going to structure. So there are many different ways to present the future. But remember the first conditional, the condition is in the present, the result is in the future. The second conditional is very different than the zero and first conditionals in that it's not real at all. We use improbable or even impossible conditions. And in those circumstances, the result cannot be definite. The result is hypothetical. Look at the first two examples. Now, these are not impossible. It's improbable, maybe. I'm not expecting anyone to break into my house. I'm not expecting that they will win the lottery. The third example is just absolutely impossible. Okay, so you can see for these types of situations, we're using the second conditional. If you look at the condition clause, we're using the past form of a verb. But be careful, these conditions didn't really happen in the past. They've never happened. They're hypothetical. This is called the unreal past. If you want a little more information about the unreal past, I recommend you watch the video on wish statements. Just remember that the unreal past never actually happened. We're not talking about a past event. This is just the form the verb takes for a hypothetical situation. A quick note about the verb to be in the unreal past. Have a look at the third example. If you were a superhero, which one would you be? Let's change the subject in that sentence. If I were a superhero. Never say if I was. Now, many English speakers say if I was, but technically that's incorrect. In the unreal past, always use were for every subject. I, he, she, we, they, were, always. And that's how we know it's unreal. Anyways, that's the condition. Now look at the result clause in these sentences. The result clause uses a modal of condition, and the three modals of condition that we generally use are would, could, and might. And that's how we know that this is a hypothetical situation. Now let's talk about the third conditional. Third conditional is also hypothetical, is very hypothetical, and it only deals in the past. So these are hypothetical or completely alternative past conditions, and the hypothetical result in the past of those conditions. So what does that mean? Well, look at the examples. In the condition, we have the past perfect. And this is something that never happened in the past. But I'm imagining what if this had occurred in the past and what the result would have been. If you look at the result, I'm using a past modal. Past modal is a modal and have and then a past participle. And this is a completely hypothetical past. We're just imagining how the past could have been different. And that's why the third conditional is completely hypothetical, because you can't change the past. You can only imagine how it might have been different. Past modals for the third conditional are generally could have, would have, and might have. Now, I'd like to talk about some very common errors that people make using the third conditional. And not just your students, but native English speakers make these mistakes all the time. And we need to understand that these are completely wrong. This is not how you use the third conditional. So the first one that people often say is they will put a past modal on both sides of the conditional sentence, in both clauses. You cannot use a past modal in the condition. It has to be the past perfect. So even if you say, oh, I've heard people say this before, well, they're saying it wrong. Please don't do this, and don't teach your students this. The other thing that people often do, native speakers do this a lot, is they will use the simple past in the condition. And grammatically this is completely wrong, though in context the listener understands that, yeah, okay, you're not talking about an unreal past now, you're talking about an unreal past before, but grammatically you need to use the past perfect here, not the simple past. Okay? Because the simple past is for unreal present ideas. If you, again, you might want to review what the unreal past means in the wish statements, but what you're saying here, for example, in the first example, is that Marta is not going to the meeting now. If she went to the meeting now, and then my result should be something in the present, not in the past. So make sure you're using the past perfect for these third conditional sentences. Now, that being said, we do have something in English called the mixed conditional. So a mixed conditional is a combination of the second and third condition. I'm going to take one clause here, a condition, and it is in the past. And we're going to combine it with a result clause in the present. There's nothing wrong with this sentence. If this person had been born in a different country in the past, there would be a difference today in the way they speak. I have a hypothetical past condition and a hypothetical present result. My first clause, the hypothetical past condition, is the third conditional. But the result we're seeing in the present, I use a second conditional result. It works the other way around sometimes too. I could have a condition in the present. This is the second conditional. If she were rich today, if this were her reality. In the past, I would have asked her for a loan, but I didn't. Okay? So it is possible to make a combination of the second and third conditional. The final thing I'd like to talk about is using other conjunctions. You might recall at the beginning of the video I said that the word if is not the only conjunction that you can use to make a conditional sentence, though it is the most common. So let's just have a look so we get an idea of some other conjunctions you can use. So here I have a conditional sentence with the word if. I could use the word unless. Of course, unless has a special meaning, and you're going to have to change some things. Look at the result clause. I've had to change that a little bit. But it is another way to present a conditional sentence. Here's another one. And it has a very special meaning as well. So if is not the only one. Any number of phrases can be used to present a conditional sentence. These are just a couple of examples.